Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Marketing in the Metaverse, Actionable Insights for Brands and Retailers in 2022. I'm Jasmine Enberg, Principal Analyst at Insider Intelligence, coming to you live from California. I'll be your host and moderator for this session. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Director of Marketing and Commerce Briefings at Insider Intelligence, Jeremy Goldman. Jeremy is in the New York City headquarters today. Hey, Jeremy, thanks for being here.
Hey, great to be with you.
Just a couple of things before we kick things off. If your colleagues haven't registered yet, that is not a problem. Just share the same link you used to register and they can join us too. And as always, you do not need to take notes. You'll receive a link to view the slides and a full recording of today's presentation. But we do want you to participate. Use the chat window on the right at any time to submit questions. We'll leave plenty of time at the end during the Q&A to get to as many as we can, so just keep them coming. We'll also address many of the questions sent in ahead of time during the presentation and the Q&A. But with that, let's get started. Jeremy, just yesterday, Meta changed its stock ticker from FB to Meta, which is notable for so many reasons, but it's also a clear example of the company's commitment to building the metaverse. That, of course, happened just a week after Sheryl Sandberg stepped down as CEO, or COO, excuse me. So given all of this momentum, I have to ask, how close are we to making the metaverse a reality?
You know, I'm so glad that you asked that, because you're right. There's been so much movement in this space. And I think that it is a continuum that, Meta and other companies are on, that we're going to actually talk about right now, to be honest. So basically, one of the top things that, people think about when they think about the metaverse, they think about Ready Player One and these fully immersive experiences where nobody's going to have to eat anymore and we're just going to live online all the time. And the reality is actually that there's a bit of a continuum that we're on, right? There were things that were very, not immersive, if you will, that people would spend time on, like mobile 2D games, right? And even Facebook and social media 1.0. And then, things kind of started evolving, and then you've got Fortnite and Roblox and these experiences that are immersive, but they don't have really barriers to entry, if you will. And then you've got things that we're really thinking about right now, that often require some additional technology, such as a VR headset, and people think of things like Meta's Horizon Worlds. And then there are things that are going to be even more immersive to come, where we're going to laugh at the experiences that we had back in the day. And Jasmine, you mentioned, really interesting moment back a few months ago. See if you can catch Mark Zuckerberg's sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce in the background. When he made this announcement that Facebook Incorporated was going to be Meta Platforms, and you saw that there was so much interest in the metaverse that immediately cropped up. People started really paying attention, right? You can see that huge spike that happened after that October announcement, so that really shows Meta's ability to change the way that consumers feel. But I think that when you're thinking about the attitudes towards the metaverse, a lot of people don't know what to make of it. Some people are very excited about it. You have nearly 3 in 5 believing that the metaverse is going to soon be as popular as social media. And I think that that will take some time to actually occur, right? But the very fact that people believe it's going to spring out of gaming, but it will be almost social networking 2.0, which we'll talk about in a second. So I think the familiarity with the metaverse as a concept is really different from a demographic standpoint, depending on who you ask. And there's a lot of statistics here. You never put 2 charts on one page, and yet I did it here. But I really want you to get a sense of what the market looks like right now. There are a lot of people who are somewhat familiar with the term. Male millennials right now making a certain amount, they're really going to be the people who are the early adopters and most familiar with immersive experiences. Now, there are noticeable demographic differences when we're talking about the metaverse. I think, it's interesting to note that Black and Hispanic consumers are often a little bit more optimistic and interested in using the metaverse because they see it as a place that they might be spoken to more as individuals and not necessarily spoken to and not heard in the way that traditional marketing has reached those consumers. Now, there is, I would say, one second, A difference in attitudes when it comes to different generations. And I think that that is something that's also, might not be surprising to some people, that older consumers are more wedded to the way that things were, and younger consumers have maybe been playing with Roblox for 7 years at this point. And, they might be very interested in continuing along that continuum and trying more and more immersive experiences as time goes on. Now, I think actually Roblox has been one of the major leaders in this space. And Ralph Lauren had a winter escape, which was, I think, a very interesting example utilization of this. And it was basically, essentially conceived as this one-off over the holidays in order to allow people to purchase a limited edition collection of digital clothing from virtual polo shops. And, it's interesting to note the fact that a lot of brands are on platforms like Roblox because they see these as the consumers of tomorrow. And as a result, they have to get people very used to what they have to offer now, right? In some cases, you've got people like brands like Hyundai that have reached out to Roblox to create campaigns, despite the fact that most of the Roblox audience skews young, 67% are under 16 years old, which means they can't drive yet. But there are a lot of really interesting applications and utilizations of Roblox. So one, for instance, is this burrito builder experience that Chipotle created. And, this is, to me, what's very interesting about this is, I'll show you a little bit of the experience right here. So this is a thing where they launched this game and virtual restaurant so that people could earn these burrito bucks that would be redeemable for food at Chipotle locations. And the chain became the first major brand to let Roblox players, exchange experience currency for real world items. So some of this might look cheesy and silly to people, but the reality is that these experiences engage people in between visits to a store, but they're also driving in-store traffic. And I think that that's one thing that brands have to be aware of, is there are these opportunities to engage people in between moments where you would actually have the opportunity to reach them. Really a lot of people are seeing that it's not that we're all going to be living in the metaverse all the time, but it's an opportunity to engage people so that they will experience your brand in person. And that being said, Fortnite is another majorly popular platform. Jasmine, are you a big Fortnite player?
I am not. Are you, Jeremy?
I have played it, a bit. I'm not quite a Fortnite nerd, but I'm not a noob either. So maybe afterwards, I'll give you the 101 on it. And, brands like Coca-Cola are approaching Fortnite, and they're actually building modifications of experiences that other people might have on like kind of the vanilla version of Fortnite. So they created a modified version, a modified experience to actually launch a flavor in the metaverse that was inspired by the metaverse. So that's another example and another platform that does skew young, but not as young as Roblox does. Now, we talked a little bit about people being a little bit underserved by reality as it is. And I think that this implementation by Unilever through their degree brand was interesting. This Unilever Metathon, it basically allowed people to compete within Decentraland, which is another major immersive experience. And they could compete as they look, basically, or they could change their avatar to reflect kind of how they feel inside. And so it was a very inclusive experience for these individuals who often feel neglected by the world as it is. And that's why I think it's interesting to note that consumers are overwhelmingly, they are hopeful that the metaverse is going to be a little bit more equitable than the world as it's currently constructed. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that, Horizon Worlds is doing a lot of interesting things right now. And we can talk about Horizon nonstop because I'm big fan of some of the things that they're doing. It's really interesting to follow. I'll show you a little bit of the experience here. But essentially what this was is that Wendy's did something kind of similar to what you saw with that Chipotle implementation. They launched an engaging social game within Horizon Worlds, and it included a virtual baconator. It allowed people to engage with a brand in between experiences, so they can get the sense of kind of the brand when they weren't actually in a physical location. So that's actually a very interesting way of using this. And you see that a lot of these implementations are one-offs, but in reality, people are starting and brands are starting to realize that you can create an ongoing relationship with these next-gen experiences. Now, I would say that like we would be remiss if we didn't say that some people don't yet see the promise of the metaverse. It's just not the same as the sentiment of 2 in 3 consumers. So that's a lot, but at the same time, it's important to note that a lot of these people haven't tried these immersive experiences yet. And from the people who I've spoken to and interviewed, once they have these experiences, they tend to feel a little bit differently.
So Jeremy, looking at the last chart, it makes me wonder, I know you've talked a lot about demographic differences here in the US when it comes to how people view the metaverse. Are there differences in terms of perhaps how people view the metaverse that's being built by different companies, or even differences, worldwide among consumers?
Yeah, so very interesting question. I mean, I do have a little bit actually here about metaverse around the world, because it is important to note, you're right. Like we at Insider Intelligence, we take a global view and we look at each market, but it's important to understand that there are different market differences, if you're looking around the world. So first off, as you see, in a lot of ways, Asia is ahead of the US, the North American market. In China, if you look at the amount of IT spending overall tied to metaverse experiences, that's going to be 200 billion at a 20.2 compound annual growth rate by 2025, right? So, if you look at this opportunity for brands, they're seeing a lot of money and a lot of spend is going to be going into this space. I think it's interesting to note that Chinese consumers are a little bit ahead of American consumers in terms of how they see the metaverse and the applications for it, and the fact that it'll be a great place to spend time with friends and network, which then means, of course, there's going to be a brand opportunity to get in front of them. And in South Korea, if you look, you see that in terms of the total amount of people who've used VR, by a lot of metrics, they are, again, ahead of the average American consumer. There are other spaces such as Zepeto that are virtual spaces that are bigger abroad in some cases. And a lot of people feel that they're somewhat well equipped to talk about the metaverse. In the UK, I think it's interesting that some British consumers, when compared to the US, have a little bit more trepidation when it comes to brands and their relationship in the metaverse. I think Americans are used to being advertised to left and right, so there's a little bit of a difference there. And then I think in Germany, it is interesting that a lot of people, they can imagine applications for the metaverse. When asked in a Deloitte study and given a number of different options, as people kind of went through, they see a lot of applications, that it's not just all going to be gaming. It's not going to all be connecting with friends, but conducting business meetings in the metaverse, which we can talk about another time, B2B and whatnot. And then lastly, I think in France, we have some good data about this, is that there is a lot of interest in shopping in the metaverse. What's going to be the next iteration of e-commerce? It probably will be a lot more of an immersive experience. And I know that you've covered, Jasmine, in some of your great work, some of what Snap has done in this area to just create these more immersive VR and AR enabled experiences. So, in terms of what's next for this space, because I think that's obviously very important for us to be thinking about, where is it going? And I think once accessibility is solved for, that's a major component of this. A lot of people, see a VR headset as just being too expensive. And what's interesting is that whether or not they're expensive, a lot of it is tied to perception. There are people who have paid $500 for a PlayStation 5, and they're not necessarily affluent, but they just see the applicability and how much they're going to use that thing. And as brands and retailers, start to create more and more interesting experiences, and I kind of think about this as Netflix with the Bridgerton phenomenon or Squid Game. You don't want to be you don't want to be left out as part of the zeitgeist, right? And right now these immersive experiences haven't yet had that Bridgerton moment where everybody needs to be engaged in a particular experience. Things like that are going to really make that expensive headset, not appear as expensive. So that's something that we expect over time to happen. I think it is important that brands and retailers, they have to keep engaging in the metaverse and do these tests and learns and these interesting things that get in front of all different types of consumers. And as they do these things, then we would expect that the average person becomes more familiar with the metaverse and the fact that it's not all or nothing. And I think that it can probably start to look at, this is something we covered in one of our subscriber-only briefings. Babylist created this virtual room that people could actually, a showroom that when people were, shopping for their first child, they can imagine, what a crib would look like. They can imagine what a nursery would look like, as they were building things within this next-gen immersive experience, and creating better e-commerce experiences than we have now, and even better social commerce experiences than that, brands like TikTok and Instagram are trying to push forward. I think there's a huge opportunity there. And, some of the initial test and learns that brands have done, have actually fared quite well. But it is important, I would say, to mention that experiences right now, people are willing to pay for an immersive experience online, such as attending a concert, hearing a talk, where you really feel like you're there. That's something that I think people can really imagine a lot more than buying virtual goods like NFTs. So the NFTs are a whole nother topic. I'm sure we'll do a webinar on them another time, but ultimately people are not used to buying things that are intangible that they can't hold, but they are used to experiences that you can't hold. And for that reason, those kind of translate a little bit better right now towards the metaverse. It is important to note that you have a lot of really smart people who are trying to figure out exactly what the metaverse is going to mean to their brands and their organizations. It's one of those things where it doesn't mean it's going to all be marketing. There will be marketing applications, but some brands are thinking it's going to be really a lot more commercial. There are other brands who say it's going to be very important to our organization, but it's really going to be more of like an internal organizational thing where we can get people together. And ultimately, as you can see from this data, people really believe that it's going to have a transformational breakthrough impact to their organizations at large. So they're not necessarily sure exactly how, but they do believe that it's going to happen. And the timeline is in question, but it is something that will occur. So then I think just a few quick takeaways, because I know we had a lot of questions ahead of time, and very excited that Jasmine and I get to talk about those. But I think a few things that are just important to walk away with is, Web3 and the metaverse, it's not going to be a flip of the switch. You already see with some news that we covered actually in our briefing today, that Meta sees, a lot of pressure to basically create a little bit of a stepping stone to the metaverse, making it easier for casual 2D gamers to create user-generated content and experiences together without VR. So it's going to be one of those things where it will take time in order to change things, and it's not going to be a moment in time where we're all in the metaverse all of the time. It is a continuum. Is something immersive or is it not? So this experience, this webinar right now is somewhat immersive. If I come over to your office and give this pitch to you right in front of you, that is more immersive, right? It's a continuum, and things will continue to evolve, and brands will deliver great experiences, which will raise the bar for everybody. But I think it is important to note that there are going to be a number of different applications for the metaverse. It's not just going to be marketing will own it. Some people will use it for brand awareness. Some people will use it for next generation commerce, right? There's no wrong way to do it. And this is an exciting time because brands are figuring out right now what's working, what isn't, and a lot of it's tied to what you're trying to do as an organization. And I think to not really be wedded to the way that things used to be is very important for brands. I think a little bit about this, about you can go to archive.org and look at the, websites in 2000, right? And we didn't think that we were looking at an awful website in that moment in time. And the same thing, you look at a website in the year 2010, and now you look back at it and you say, wow, I can't believe that I bought a product that was that pixelated. So this is a continuum. It is moving forward. Again, the timeline and how fast this happens is in question, but brands are going to be creating great experiences, and then consumers are going to start to demand these experiences from basically everybody else. So yeah, that's about it.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. That was fantastic, as always. And now we can move on to our Q&A. We received more than 150 questions from our audience ahead of time. So I'm going to pick a couple of those first, and then we'll move into the live questions that we received. If we don't get to your question right now, though, don't worry. We'll also be sending out written answers to the top questions we received after the event. And for those of you who are asking, you will be receiving the playback and the deck after the event as well. So for our first question, Jeremy, what should brick and mortar retailers be doing to prepare for virtual retail growth?
It's a really good question. I think one of the key things that the brands that I've spoken to are doing is they're really trying to make sure that they enlist the right kind of support. So in some cases, that means creating new agency relationships to actually make sure that you're speaking to people who have done the proper development on a platform like Decentraland or the Sandbox, and to really find the right partners. I think in a lot of ways, it does mean that you are going to rethink that experience. So a perfect example is there have been a number of brands and retailers, we're not going to name who, some of them might even be on this webinar right now, we forgive you, where you've created and added certain things that don't necessarily have to be there. So such a perfect example is there have been implementations where the floor space between departments has been replicated. So it actually takes longer to get from one department to another within this metaverse next-gen experience. And that's something that's a necessity in the real world, right? To space out things. But you have to rethink what that experience is going to look like in the metaverse. And sometimes that means not necessarily having to walk, quote unquote, for 45 seconds to get from department to department, because that was a limitation of the real world. And you have to rethink things as you're building these next-gen retail experiences.
Our next question is such an important one, and the answer will probably evolve over time. But Jeremy, right now, how should marketers be defining success in the metaverse?
So I love that one, because I think I know this is something that I learned a little bit actually from some of your research with TikTok and commerce. I think what's interesting is that every brand is setting those KPIs, and they're figuring out what metrics to pay attention to based off of what they're trying to achieve. Like there's no set metrics, and that's okay. I think, when you think about email marketing, for instance, people think about clicks and opens, but in some cases you would have an email marketing campaign where you were really optimizing for driving in-store traffic. And the same thing is true with the metaverse, right? There are some campaigns that I just showed where the goal was to drive in-store traffic. We actually have seen even campaigns like Selfridges had an interesting campaign where they had it was essentially a metaverse campaign that in part drove people from the retail experience into the metaverse experience. And those are interesting things to pay attention to as well. So short answer is, what is your organization trying to achieve, and honing in on that, and really thinking about that rather than just saying all of our competitors are doing something, we've got to do something.
Great. The next question I'm actually happy to give my perspective on, but Jeremy, I'd like to give you a chance to answer first. How do companies foresee or plan on incorporating influencers or creators into the metaverse?
Oh my God, this is perfect for you, given your work. So yeah, I want to hear what you have to say too. But I think one of the key things to note is that just like when Instagram, started getting big, there were people who were Facebook influencers, and then all of a sudden they did not, translate to Instagram as Instagram was getting bigger. And I think you see this where some people kind of figure out the mechanics of one platform and they get really good at it. And the short answer is that, for these next gen platforms, there are different creators. There are really popular NFT artists that brands have sought out, who have a really big following with this particular area. So I think the short answer is to figure out who the creators and influencers are that are going to be brand aligned, but are also going to be delivering some value to you as you're trying to create this campaign, and not to assume that it's the same, influencers as you might have worked with previously. But yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're spot on. I would say that probably the 30,000 foot strategy here for most companies is that creators really should play a key role in any metaverse plans that they have. Creators are going to be a pivotal part of not only building the metaverse, but bringing in audiences. And kind of to your point, Jeremy, we've already seen creators on the social platforms be able to move their followers from one to another. We've seen creators be able to adapt to the different types of platforms that there are. I do believe that, like TikTok brought about this whole new idea of everyday influencers, the metaverse will probably redefine creators and influencers as well. And the ones that are really going to be able to succeed in the metaverse, and the ones that brands should be turning to, are those that are, for lack of a better term, sort of creative creators, those that are able to create these more immersive, interactive experiences that maybe aren't as common in creator content on social platforms. And we're already seeing, the social platforms give creators a lot of tools to be able to do this. They have built these creator AR studios, for example, on some of the platforms. And, the ones that are leaning into those tool sets are probably the ones that brands should be looking at first as they figure out their creator metaverse strategies.
By the way, just one more quick thing about that. We might have even seen in one of the videos, there's a YouTube reviewer that's actually, posting some of their content and their experience. So they're not a creator per se in the way that they're creating these experiences or creating an NFT. But this is, you have people who have massive followings on YouTube simply because what they're doing is they're replaying their experiences in the metaverse, right? So if you're a brand and you can create an, partnership with somebody like that, or figure out what do they want to quote unquote cover as a new media journalist, like those are the kinds of things where this intersection between, coverage and creator, is intersecting. Find those people who are going to promote your campaign and make it bigger.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties back to what you were talking about, in terms of education. People look to the creators that they follow to be educated on certain topics, and there is going to be a learning curve for a lot of people in terms of the metaverse. And I think creators can provide a lot of value in bringing more information and bringing more awareness about the metaverse to followers. All right, but let's move on to our live questions. The first is, Jeremy, and this is such a great one. Who is going to win the race to dominate the metaverse?
So it's funny that you said that. So we actually have, and I don't know if we can pull that up or if we have that anywhere. Let me just see. We actually had this, so this was a chart that I was actually putting in one of our briefing products yesterday. So maybe it went live today. But basically, just what are the companies that people associate with the metaverse? It's interesting to think about that in relation to who's going to win, right? So obviously Meta, just from the name change, of course, it makes sense that they're winning in that regard. They've got 21% of their headcount approximately tied up in their Reality Labs division. And they've got the resources to bring the right people on. So I think that it's an open question, but just in terms of the total investment and the smart people that are focused on it, I would say that they've got, a pretty good shot. But then you've got people like, and I know you've covered Snap a lot. It's interesting that Snap doesn't want to be associated with this term metaverse because of the fact that there's been almost backlash against it, So that's why for us, we just think of metaverse. It might be a buzzword. It might be like the new big data. But the reality is there are these immersive experiences and they can take a lot of different forms. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different moving parts. I mean, Meta is obviously incredibly committed to making the metaverse a reality. I think there are a lot of hurdles that it has to overcome in order to get there, many of which you talked about, but there's also a lot of the privacy issues that makes consumers wary about either buying Meta hardware and using Meta hardware or using Meta services as well. So, I think there's a lot of potential there. They're clearly putting a lot of resources behind it. And we have seen in the past that what Facebook, now Meta, wants to achieve, it generally is able to. So I'm definitely not counting them out. But on a related note, another question that came in is that, would you say that Facebook has successfully reinvented itself with this pivot to Meta? What do you think?
I love that question because it's interesting that the metrics, are so incredibly different. Then yes, from an optics standpoint, yes, they were able to make people think about them a little bit differently as a company, but the truth of the matter is almost all of their revenue is tied towards traditional digital advertising, so I think from a perception standpoint, I think that there were certain good things being done about this, but I think it's interesting to imagine a what if they would have done this pivot, let's say 24 months prior, when there wasn't so much pressure on them to do something to innovate with respect to their digital advertising model. So I would say yes, but could it have been better? Sure. And I'm sure they're working on that.
So I would actually love to see some research on this. I know, Jeremy, you and I were talking about how consumer perceptions of Instagram and WhatsApp may have changed when by Facebook and now by Meta was added to those platforms apps. And we found out that a lot of people didn't realize that those companies were owned by Facebook, now Meta. And I would be very curious to see some consumer surveys about how people feel about this rebranding. I don't know if you've seen any, but I'll definitely be on the lookout for those.
Yeah, same. And I think I've got some third-party research firms that I can put pressure on to try to get us those numbers.
Great. So the next question, which came in both during this live session as well as ahead of time, so I think there's a lot of interest in this one, but it is, how can B2B brands incorporate the metaverse into their plans?
So one thing that's interesting that's come across, a few times in my research is that the B2B applications, they're there, and in some cases they might even be likely to come to fruition, in a bigger way in the short term. But yeah, there are a few really good B2B applications. One thing is, you've seen essentially some companies, there's the I can't say it that well, Metaverse. So it's basically a place where people can actually meet, and it's a little bit of like an internal way of people, taking meetings in a virtual space with people, and to feel like you're actually there with people rather than 3,000 miles away or whatever. And so essentially closing deals and cutting down on the amount of travel that you do, while at the same time not necessarily just settling for Zoom. That's one of the things, is to actually close big deals. People want to do that in person, and that was a bit strange for a lot of companies that were raising funds in the early days of COVID. And I think, what people found is there were limitations to Zoom. So to be able to do certain things in person without being in person is probably one of the top applications for B2B.
The next question is actually something that I'm wondering about as well. So Jeremy, what are the concerns about brand safety within the metaverse? Everything is, happening in these new immersive experiences, and things are happening live. What are brands doing to address these kinds of challenges?
Unfortunately, there have even been some kind of cases of, sexual harassment that have been tied to metaverse and immersive experiences. So that is something that brands have to be mindful for. This space is very much the Wild West right now. So it's not big enough for, platforms to be thinking about content moderation in as big of a way. And that could be a mistake, just by virtue of the fact that you want people to feel comfortable with these experiences. right as they first get developed, right? So I think that that's something that is basically, it's nascent. There haven't been major issues, and what I expect is it will probably take one or two major issues to pop up in the metaverse before it becomes a larger conversation.
So I love that you called it kind of a wild west, because that reminds me sort of the early days of influencer marketing. That term was being thrown around all the time to describe it. And I may be going back to this question of creators in the metaverse. I think one thing that brands can be doing, at least in terms of working with creators, is making sure that they follow the same guidelines they would with working with creators on social platforms in terms of brand safety, making sure that these creators are aligned with their brand values, thoroughly vetting them, doing their research. And I think that will really help mitigate some of these concerns around brand safety. Next question is, what industries do you see being the most successful in the metaverse?
So I would say like there is a reason why you've seen a lot of these fast food retailers that have jumped into the metaverse first, because they saw an application that happened to work, the first time they tried. So you see a lot of other people start to follow suit. I think that one of the key things is with the metaverse is to understand that not everybody's in it yet, which means that if your brand or if you're an agency, if you're supporting a brand that has mass appeal, then that's probably something that you want to have a metaverse campaign around. Driving in-store traffic is something that acknowledges the fact that people don't want to spend all of their time online. They want an incentive, they want to have an engaging experience, and then they want to get offline. So actually being able to purchase things and to essentially provide a better experience than e-commerce, or to drive in-store traffic, those are two of the most concrete applications that we've seen be successful so far.
So you talked a little bit earlier about email marketing and comparing it to the metaverse, but we do have a question on that specifically, actually. So have you seen the metaverse used in any direct mail or email marketing yet? Do you expect to see that?
I think it's a very interesting way of putting it. I think that if you're more wedded to email marketing, and I used to cover email marketing for us, if you're really tied to email marketing, there's a good chance that you might not be the type of person who is really interested in getting into a metaverse experience. So that's a generalization, but at the same time, it's somewhat true. I think that as metaverse becomes a little bit more widely adopted, then you will start to see that. And I think you will also start to see, it is a good point as I think about it, people who have been really married towards things like email that have been, not really, they've not been growing for the most part. They've been stagnant, they're still around. I think that as you see people who've got a part of their marketing mix that isn't quite working, they are going to be making more, campaigns in the metaverse in order to see if they can get ahead of competition. And it's not necessarily about the first campaign, it's the test and learn that allows you to succeed in the subsequent ones.
All right. And then we have another question, which I think is really interesting. And it is that the majority of brands are not doing the basics of digital right so far. Still, they're starting to figure out how to be a part of the metaverse. Isn't that a dangerous distraction for the vast majority of brands? What do you think?
If you're doing something right, and if you're essentially, if a lot of the things that you're doing are working, that's generally a really good moment to carve out a little bit of time and to do something and be thinking about the future, right? But that being said, yes, I absolutely agree. And I think, we've seen a lot of brands that have spoken to us, about uncertainty in the economy and being concerned about inflation and supply chain, and their digital ads, being challenged from a measurement perspective, right? So some of these things are the low-hanging fruit that you do have to solve before you're thinking about doing something next gen. At the same time, I do think that, we both have some folks that we know at Netflix, and they have a really great business model, and it could have been blockbusters, right? So you do always have to think about how much time can you carve out to even creatively cannibalize some of the things that you're doing in order to be thinking about the future.
Absolutely, I completely agree. All right, one kind of definition question. What distinguishes a metaverse versus an online game? Is it simply the presence of real life brands in the game, or is it connecting the experiences in the game to the real world?
It's neither, in the sense that there is really, and I think, this is as we're thinking about it in terms of a continuum, right? There are two-dimensional games that some people are saying, well, that's the metaverse, right? There are some people who say, no, how dare you? You can't say that. It has to be VR. You need a headset. So, some other people will jump in and say, but you know what? If you have a really great high fidelity AR experience, then that's the metaverse. So the short answer is you can't define it right now in necessarily those terms. The way that we're really thinking about it is that if you have an immersive 2D game that makes people feel like they're there, and you want to call it the metaverse, go ahead. It's really a umbrella term. And likewise, you can have a VR experience that feels very low fidelity. It does not feel immersive. So is that the metaverse? And that's a matter of definition. And these definitions have not really coalesced at this time.
All right, Jeremy, one last question, and I think it's a good one to end on as it's forward thinking, but what do you think are the key factors or features that need to mature in order to see more adoption of the interoperability of the metaverse?
Oh, that's a great question. I think one of the key things is everybody is really thinking about the metaverse right now from a platform perspective in terms of creating something really big that obviously they can control to some extent. There are some decentralized, companies that are trying to create the metaverse, and it isn't really yet known in terms of how these experiences are all going to connect. There are some people who basically have created NFTs that can then be brought in to be incorporated with your virtual avatar in more than one virtual experience. And as the metaverse grows, we are probably going to see more and more demands for interoperability. But again, just like we were talking about the Wild West before, that's something that remains to be seen. And I think one thing is that consumers will expect interoperability. When you had, for instance, Facebook data that you added something to your profile and then you went to Twitter, that data wouldn't transfer, right? And I think nobody expected it to. But I think that the metaverse will likely be a combination of virtual spaces where consumers will expect certain things to be able to transfer from one place to another. And I think that that's just an expectation that's going to be there that wasn't really there in the last iteration of the internet.
Great. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today's presentation. But if you do have another few minutes, please stay tuned after Jeremy and I sign off to watch our new Insider Intelligence quick take video on the metaverse for more on this topic. Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, and a huge thank you to our production crew behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We hope that you found this presentation useful and that you uncovered a few nuggets that you can use to drive your business forward. As we wrap up, let me take a moment to tell you what else is happening at Insider Intelligence. You can register for upcoming live analyst and tech talk webinars at insiderintelligence.com/events. On the audio side, do not forget to subscribe to Behind the Numbers, our daily podcast, on your podcast app of choice. And finally, if you're not already signed up for one of our free newsletters, please do so. You can find those at insiderintelligence.com. And remember to keep an eye on your email for a link to today's presentation. And of course, feel free to email us at any time with any questions that you might have. Thank you so much again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Welcome to Insider Quick Take, where we discuss the hottest trends in marketing tech, strategy, and consumer behavior. I'm your host, Marissa Kozlov. Today, join me on a very special episode where we take a ride through the future of the metaverse. But first things first, is it hype or reality? In October 2021, when Facebook rebranded to Meta, they poured billions of dollars into developing AR and VR devices, along with developer platforms for both. But Apple, Snap, Samsung, and Microsoft all have, or soon will have, AR or VR devices and their own visions for the metaverse. Many game and design platforms and location data companies such as Roblox, Epic, Google, and Snap are also collectively spending billions on acquiring or building their own developer tools for the metaverse. According to the IDC, these investments will catapult AR headset shipments, from 1 million in 2021 to 21 million in 2025, and VR shipments from 8 million to 29 million. Nike, Ralph Lauren, Louis Vuitton, Tommy Hilfiger, Burberry, Gucci, Vans, and Forever 21 are just some of the retailers getting involved with gaming and metaverse platforms. While most have taken an experimental approach, think one-off campaigns more about marketing than sales, some are staking claims to become metaverse pioneers in direct-to-avatar commerce. Brands in other consumer sectors are experimenting with using virtual spaces to showcase their products, while apparel, footwear, and accessories offer the most obvious use cases. Others are exploring new ways of connecting with consumers online. Virtual marketplaces already exist with products ranging from inexpensive digital skins, such as Fortnite or NBA 2K character customization, to unique NFTs that command tens of thousands of dollars a piece. Another thing we can agree on, there's nothing virtual about a broken bone or an abscessed tooth. However, healthcare in the metaverse is already here. Mixed reality, sometimes called extended reality, combines VR and AR, merging real-world and digital objects into an interactive reality. One big tech company is already there. Microsoft unveiled Microsoft Mesh, a mixed reality platform, in March 2021. Its HoloLens headset, designed for B2B purposes, projects a hologram of a person that users can interact with as if they were together in real life. Then there are the avatars. Avatar Medical creates patient avatars to help surgeons visualize medical images. Medical Avatar is a consumer-facing company that creates healthy selfies using VR to show users personalized simulations of what their future bodies may look like and experience health-wise. What would a healthcare metaverse look like? What will the metaverse as a whole look like? Well, the use cases are there. Only investments, technology, and time will tell.